Welcome to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast, the podcast where I give mechanical engineers like you the tools and motivation to get your professional engineering license and take your career to the next level. In this inspiring episode, Christian shares his incredible journey from failing the FE exam 8 times to passing the CEM, FE, and PE exams all in 1 year, fueled by purpose and perseverance. He opens up about how shifting his mindset from chasing credentials to engineering with intention transformed his career, leading him to start his own firm and serve his community. With candid stories from the field and deep insights on resilience, Christian's story is a testament to the power of faith, curiosity, and relentless growth in engineering and beyond. This episode is perfect for engineers facing exam struggles or career pivots. Welcome, Christian, to the podcast. I'm excited to have you on. And where I'd love to start out is just to share a bit about your background. I know we worked together 5 years ago when you were going for your PE, but you've come a long way since then. So let's kind of start at the beginning. If you can share a bit about your academic, professional background, and sort of everything that led up to you wanting to get the PE.
Oh, great. I like that question a lot. So I went to the New Jersey Institute of Technology. I studied actual industrial engineering. So in one sense, people would think I'd be more in factories rather than HVAC or the MEP world. But in one sense or another, it all worked out. But I was not like an academically sharp student. I struggled a lot in my first couple of years in college. A lot of it was maturity based, and I will always and forever say, once I had reunited with God, that's when things changed for me pretty intensely. So I had direction from then, and from there, went through the paces of trying to finish out and get into industry and things of that nature. I actually started out on the HVAC side as an HVAC technician or a controls technician for a company in New Jersey. And what's funny is I actually took the FE exam, the precursor to the PE. I took it 8 times. 8 times.
Wow.
Yeah, 8 times. And it's over the course of several years. And, I had some industry experience, but I think, if I was to even the arc, I guess, of getting to with the PE and everything, because it was getting to the point where I was, showing up to the driveway or the parking lot of the test. And I was like, this is just not going to work out. And I left. My motivations at the time for getting a PE were really honestly just to attach letters to my name. I didn't really have a vision or a goal. And a lot of my life, and I mentioned spirituality is a very big part of that for me. It's everything is attached to that. Everything has purpose, and even engineering. And so, failing it, passing it, failing it, passing it. And several years went by. I think about maybe 7 years or up until about a year before I connected with you. I had already been in the industry for some time. I'd done a lot of turnkey work on the design build side, MEP, and things of that nature. And I was talking to my pastor one day, and because he had mentioned that he wanted to move into a new location because we were starting to fill up, and we're located in Newark, New Jersey. And when he said that, and I'm again, I hope this doesn't take this too far off of where you were going on this, but when he said that, that's when things started to click in my mind. Like, man, I would love to be able to serve my church and my community and be able to sign and seal on their behalf, and to be a fee or soft cost at least that they wouldn't have to worry about. I knew I could help them with managing trades, managing the project itself. But to actually be able to do that and to support that would be an honor, truly, truly an honor, and to do that. So afterward, again, this is after the 8th attempt of the FE, I ended up taking the CEM course because there was a little bit of a shift in my thinking. I began to start testing and taking certifications, less about the certifications anymore, and more about the edification to help me grow as an engineer. How would I be able to take this, converted into actual knowledge I can use on a day-to-day basis? And so CEM through the Association of Energy Engineers was on my list. It got good reviews. I said, hey, let's try this. I took the 1-week course, and then the professor or the instructor was like, hey, why don't you go for your PE? You should go after it. And I'm like, man, I'm 8 times in on failing this FE. I can't even get past that. At this point, I'm funding the NCES. I'm becoming a guaranteed check every single year. So I at one point I was like, let me not try. But I remember my conversation with my pastor, and I really spent time to think about it, to pray about it. I'm like, if it's really meant to be, I will give it a shot. So at the end of that year was in November, and it was in November. I can't remember the exact year. I took the CEM, I passed that. And then the next year, the pandemic hit. And in that same year, I took the FE and the PE in the same year. And then within that 11-month period, passed all three, the CEM, the FE, and the professional engineering exam.
Wow. In 2020.
In 2020, and you were a huge part of that, man. And I just want to say thank you for, your support, your program. I am a big cheerleader for mechanical PE exam prep anytime I can get it. But that was those steps that took me towards there, and wanting to get my PE became more purpose driven. And I just think it's incredible. We'll talk a little bit later about what ended up happening with that project with the church when I get into some of the details. But that's just kind of the lead up into what got me there.
That's amazing. And it's fascinating for me too, looking back on it, because when we worked together, I remember talking a lot about some of the nitty-gritty details of the PE exam and technical stuff. And we even met and did some sessions on that. You did a lot of the work on your own with the program, but I didn't know some of that backstory about the FE and everything else that you had kind of gone through leading up to that. And I just think that's such a great takeaway for anybody listening, that you can kind of go through the motions and look at the study material, trying to figure out what's the right answer. But if it doesn't have a reason behind it why you're doing it, then it just feels like you're going through a process. But all of a sudden, when there's a purpose, your attention, your focus, it shifts. And I love what you said about switching to edification, right? You actually wanting to come to this work and be curious, and how can I serve better by knowing my stuff and having a better technical grounding. And that shift, no matter what it is, whether it's CEM, FE, or PE, or anything else that you're working on, any other project, you're just going to show up differently and say, like, how does this all work? What's the right way to get this job done? So I'd like to know just a little bit about because when we started working together, you were in the controls world. And I think that's interesting work, because even if you don't come from a design background, I feel like the controls engineers always know how it really works, right? Because there's a design intent, and then there's building it, and there's always things that change, and then there's controlling it, which you have to understand how it's supposed to work. So how long were you doing that? What were some of your early, you mentioned you did some turnkey work, but what was that time like?
Yeah, it's funny, the controls work, when I started as a technician, I think the hands-on experience, because I came out of college thinking that, when they were giving me this role and they said, you're going to be a field engineer, I'm like, okay, great. Where's the desk? When you sit down and there's a coffee machine. And it wasn't that. I got tools, and I'm like, oh, okay. And a drill. And I'm like, okay, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And so I was a controls engineer, and but I was in the field, a field technician. And I think that's the type of learning style that's probably more for myself that was best, because I was working backward at that point. I had seen air handlers, boilers, chillers starting up, failing, having issues. I saw RFIs come to life that were requested a year before, and then later on, the issue manifesting itself in the middle of commissioning or startup. So I think that, the controls world gave me a lot of background as to what was going on and what was the issues that may have led to like an improper design. So yeah, there's definitely a more systems understanding. How does the system work, right? We're not just looking at equipment selections and things of that nature, but how does the system as a whole work? And I think that was a huge benefit when you're actually doing the problems, because you're sitting down and looking at a cooling tower and you're trying to understand exactly, what's the temperature of the air exiting it, right? And not just the water going down to the system, the chiller. And it's just running your mind, what's the sequence of operations for this would look like, right? How does this inform me? Why is this even important there? So I spent a good bulk, I would say a majority of my career on the control side. And then whenever I was pulled into like an environment where I did turnkey work, it was because of my controls background, because they never really had anybody doing that. And one way or another, I'd find myself managing an actual full mechanical install, boiler, or chiller, things of that nature. And I was always naturally curious to the why. Like controls engineers, I think, if they are really, really digging deep into what it means to be a controls engineer, will spend time to understand some of the math and the calculations behind loads and, pressures, what influences an actual selection of a piece of equipment. But I think a lot of that kind of after hours work is where I got a lot of that studying, like working drawings backward, I used to have a subscription to magazines like Engineered Systems, and you're always
Mm,
kind of trying to understand the broader picture of what's going on and
yeah.
why does this work, and it helps you answer questions. So yeah, I think from a systems perspective, the controls. When I studied with a couple of folks, and actually even after your program, I met someone else, Ray Wong, actually, who took your course. I tutored him a little bit, and it was me being able to draw on my experiences and explaining the why. The problems. I think you did a great job in setting it up, and I could take it to a real life example of, hey, this is if this is wrong, this is actually what happens, right? Or what some of the issues you may encounter in the field.
Yeah, I have the utmost respect for the controls engineers that I've had the opportunity to work with in my travels because it's easy to think about everything from the top down when you're conceiving of a construction project. Like
Mhm.
you have the whole building life cycle. We're going to acquire this real estate, we're going to do a design, we're going to build it. But if you kind of reverse engineer that and start from the end, start from the commissioning process and build back up. Also, when you've sort of lived that life cycle a few times and you've run into problems and those problems have to get solved, who's there at the end picking up the pieces saying, okay, well, this is how we thought it was going to work out, but that was 6 months ago, that was a year ago, that was 2 years ago when we put this
Mhm.
on paper, and it was all well intentioned, but here we are now, and this has to work, and it has to work in 2 weeks because people are moving in. So
Mhm.
how are we going to do that? And there's certain minds that you want in the room that are able to work on that problem and then get to it, actually bringing it to life. So yeah, it's just such an important any HVAC system and other systems too. So how about after that? At what point did you transition to what you're doing now? Maybe there was some stuff in between.
Yeah. So there were a couple things in there. Like I mentioned, I did some, it was a government contract I did when I did some of the turnkey work. And that was good because, I had already done like some hands-on type stuff in the past, more residential, but to do it in a commercial setting was really good. I went back into controls because it's a sweet spot for me and I felt a lot more second nature, a little easier for me to be able to do. And then I was okay, well, I got this done. I took the PE exam, with your course, and then afterward, I passed it and started thinking to myself, okay, I got to see how the designers live, right? I've done the contract work, I've managed designers as part of a turnkey operation, but I need to sit behind the desk, and I didn't really want to do it because I'm like, man, that's the dark side. I'm going to go into design for a few years. I don't know. So I went into a consulting group over in New York, and I worked with them actually as a controls engineer for critical systems, and it was for a mission critical systems for data centers and things of that nature. What's funny is right before I went there, I purchased the add-on to your course, and I'll give you a cheap plug. You had a mission critical course that I don't know if you still sell that, but
Yeah, we do.
it was an awesome course. It really prepped me very much so for at least understanding what I'm getting into. Because at that point, I had worked on healthcare or some other types of critical systems, but I never did data centers at the clip that they were asking. And we were doing significant amount of that data center design. And that firm, I think one of the best firms out there, and I was so blessed to be able to work with them because our coordination process was so intense that you almost had to understand the other trades work for them to be able to lay out
Mm,
your needs. When we're talking about, for example, dual power supplies from diverse sources, right? And then being able to make sure that, going through breaker calcs, and figuring out who's sizing what, going through the equipment cut sheets together. The coordination process, I think, that was probably, I couldn't have asked for a better scenario to help me become more well-rounded in understanding other disciplines in that sense. And so, as time progressed, my second son came in, and then my church, they had, through a true miracle, got a new location in Newark in addition to the one that they were at. And so at that time, I knew, okay, this is real now, right? So this was a couple of years ago, prayed about this, and then this is coming up now. There's going to be some steps that have to be taken. And so I started to spend some time. I had already incorporated during the pandemic, way before that, in the company's name. Our company's name is Lionheart Engineering Management and Consulting, so EMC. And a lot of our work in terms of execution, there's a blend between the contract services like turnkey work and then actual some design, management design processes. And so I had spent some time with that consulting group. And then afterward, I was okay, let's start prepping all the licensing work and things of that nature that need to go into that. And when, at least in terms of where I knew one of my strong suits would be commissioning. So I spent some time just again assembling things. I got another certification, the BCXP from ASHRAE,
Hmm.
and that was quick at that one. And then I got approached to do some retro commissioning for like a 1 million square foot hospital in Queens in the city. And
Wow.
that project came through my LLC, and I was like, okay, now is the time. Like my pastor says, if there's no provision, there's really no vision. So I had 2 kids. I'm like, I can't be going out cowboying it anymore. That time is over. And so when I got that project, that was the good lead-in that allowed me to be able to leave my job full time. And what was so great is that we had developed such a relationship with my old employer that they wanted me to consult for them afterward. And they were my first client, my second
That's
client.
amazing.
Yeah, it was. And it helped a lot. And so during this whole process, I'm commissioning that hospital. I'm still doing a little bit of mission critical work as a consultant. And then I'm starting to get which ended up becoming a turnkey design build project for the church. So I'm working with the architect. We're getting Matterport scans of the building. We're starting to get initial concepts and schematic designs going. And so that's where a lot of that started. And I'm just happy to even say, as of last Sunday, this was the first service that they had at the new building, and we were able to finish up there. So
That's amazing. I'm just so impressed and proud of you, man, just hearing these accomplishments. And it's funny when you think about the vision that you had early, it takes years to bring that to life, but the years go by and, step by step, brick by brick. And then at some point, like you said, there's a leap and it's a tense moment sometimes, but you did it. And now you're on your own operating as a PE and you're doing the work you want to do. And it's just so cool to see.
yeah, it didn't come without its challenges. I could tell you that for sure. And I think a lot of times people will look at the pathway to success and say it's just hard work. And I'm not a believer in luck. Again, I believe that there's like a divine appointment and real things behind that. So I'll tell you a quick story to the FE when I finished that and passed that. On my way back home, because you had those nice PE exam journey like snippets, like working out, taking care of your body. Like I said, your offering seemed a lot more holistic than just studying. You were approaching the engineer as part of the problem to be solved, to like what's your mindset. So I was working out, I was taking your advice. I'm like, okay, the pandemic's here, nobody's outside, go for jogs. I go for a jog, and then I got pain in the back of my right knee. I'm like, what's going on? And I come home, and the pain just didn't stop after some hours. So I go to the ER, and come to find out I had a blood clot in my right leg.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, and I was like, what? And I was freaking out because I'm like, where did this come from? What's going on? And the stress level was crazy at the time. That the nurse even told me, she was like, there's no way you would have known on your own that you had this. It was so small, it was so tiny. And so we, went through that process. And I think I mentioned that story because at the end of the day, at your tombstone, you won't have PE, CEM, BCX. Well, that stuff is irrelevant. And it's not even just about the things that you do, but the relationships that you have, and I know my relationship with God is what kept that vision very precise. It's like, okay, if I was designed and built in this world to accomplish something, and this is part of it, I want to get there. I want to try. And I don't know how many years I have left, right? So I don't operate from a sense of tomorrow is tomorrow. Let's let it come, let it come. But I'm here for a purpose, and I want to engineer with purpose.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if that's where we were going, if that's an issue, but I don't know. I can't,
No,
it's hard for me to tell the story without some of
no,
that information.
that is very much part of your story. And I think you can't leave that out. Otherwise, the story doesn't make sense because it's your story.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to hear a little bit about what you can remember about the PE process specifically, because you did them all in the same year. So I know that was kind of a whirlwind, but probably once you passed you said you did the CEM first?
Yeah, so that November I did the CEM. That May, the next year, well, into the next calendar year,
Yeah.
I did the May or June, I did the FE, and then by the September, I think I did the PE.
So
September,
that's amazing
October.
to me because that's a very fast prep for the PE, and the FE had been a journey in and of
Yeah.
itself. So how did you get ready for the PE so fast? And what was the contrast between the FE prep process? Because like the FE is more problems and it goes faster. It's a bit more like surface level, and the PE is deeper. Did you have an easier time studying for the PE than the FE? Most
Yeah,
people would
that's a
say the
good place to
opposite, but
that's a good place to start because I think, after a certain time in the industry, and you can attest to this, it gets to a point where you're studying for certs or licenses, and there is a legitimate question. It's like, okay, this is great, but Monday I got to go work on a boiler, right? How much of
Right.
this is coming with me, and you're doing differential equations during the FE. I think that's why, I'd always encourage you get it done in college, get it done. Because I'm not saying it's a bad test. I'm just saying the relevancy for your day to day, if you're in the industry and practicing, begins to diminish significantly as the
Yeah,
years
the
go
day you graduate, right?
by.
You're moving away from a lot of that material.
Exactly. I mean, from a methodology standpoint, of course, I think if you're in the industry and you should always never take for granted the opportunity to learn how to be resourceful. So the FE will teach you that, right? How to be resourceful, how to look. If you're going and doing a code review and you want to look at the NEC, that process of checking the situation and going to the code book is essentially how you look up answers and problems for an FE, right? The FE manual. So that part is good. I think the PE was a lot more intimately involved, and I'll say the first time I tried it, I started studying. It was not. So I tried a resource. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to be disparaging, but I think they were so disconnected from the soul of what it means to be a PE that it was just running through problems, and I think that's part of the I think what made it harder to really study. It's like, of course, we're going to do problems. We know that already, right? But it's getting into the kind of heart of the work. And there were live courses. I would say this: your course, what I found very interesting is you understand engineers are taught essentially to be scrutinizing everything. That's our style. That's the way it is. Like, it's even if you're married, you'll feel it. You just look at everything. Everything comes with a question and an answer. It's like, well, why, right? And you're just taught to that. And I think the way you set questions up is what made it conducive for me to study, because you set them up the same way I'd approach a problem in the field. Well, why? This is what they're asking, but why? What are we doing with this, right? What's going to happen? So I'd say, yeah, the FE was probably not as it wasn't as fun to study for, that's for sure, and it
Mhm.
definitely was a lot more disconnected from my day to day. The PE and the mechanical PE exam prep. Even just this past week, actually, somebody asked me to write a sequence for them for a runaround loop, and I thought about a runaround loop problem that you had put together, and I'm like, man, or adiabatic cooling, right? The adiabatic process and cooling. And in design, you kind of run into this, but I think when I went to mission critical, a lot of the work was evaporative cooling equipment and things of that nature. And it was just relevant. Things are just in front of you and you're dealing with that on a day
Yeah.
to day. And so I think it was good in that sense. And again, the longer you wait, CEM, I think is along the same vein of the PE, because they're marketed to professionals who are already there. I mean, it's a week long course, so you're really in a sense kind of cramming anyway. So learning how to test take, I think that was a good course for me to get back into the vein of taking a test that was, limited time, a lot of questions, and a lot of references and an open book scenario. But I'd say above that, taking your course actually, I think, gave the problem substance, gave you something to think about afterward. And I think, like I said, the approach made it something relevant that it would find its way into my thought process like the next Monday. So I'm like, even to this day, somebody asked me a question about ashtrays. They have a certified HVAC designer course, and they were like, "Hey, how do I study for this?" I said, "Go take Dan Malloy's course, and then go take the ashtray course. I think you'll be in good shape."
That's very generous. I mean, you were in the perfect place because you had a very high level of motivation and purpose that you had come upon, and you had a lot of momentum before you came in. And you were in just the right place in terms of what you were working on day to day, that these problems would feel relevant and feel important and feel real. Sometimes I work with engineers that are going for the PE that don't really work on systems that are as relevant as what you were doing. And that happens. Not everybody's path is the same. And you have to pick, if you want to get your PE in mechanical, you only have three choices. You're going to pick one of those three choices. So maybe it's TFS, maybe it's HVAC. And now you're looking at these problems that are not really in your wheelhouse. And it can just seem like the FE seemed for a lot of us, where it's a bit disconnected from the day to day. But that wasn't the case for you. You were very much dealing with these systems. So I think you had a heightened level of curiosity. And I love what you said. This is what I hope for everyone that comes through the program, is that they're thinking about the material in between when they're working on it. You do a study session, and then later that day or the next day or the next week, you're still kind of puzzling about some of the key ideas in there. And if that's happening for you as you're studying, that's exactly what we want.
Yeah.
And if you really zoom out, that's exactly what we want from professional engineers in our country, right? Is that they're the kind of people who grind on these problems because we want to get it right. We want to make it safe. We want to make it work. That's kind of the role of the PE is to be ultimately responsible for having things work the way they should at the end. So yeah, I'm just so glad that you had that experience and got the result. So, I mean, obviously a big accomplishment for you to do all three of those in 1 year. Remember how it felt when it was all said and done?
I know how my wife felt, and she was like, "You better not be taking any more tests after this," knowing that, my kids, and I think I try my best to not get in their way. I'd get up really early or I stay up really late and try to find time to do it. I took the train this to the city. The pandemic year, though, that was shut down a lot, or a lot of this stuff was shut down, just getting in between places. And so I would drive and sit in my car, and then I would, watch a video or take something. And at a point, I remember I would just let you set the problems up and try to see, obviously, can I come up with the same approach? Not necessarily the same answer, but what were the places in the problem set that you were pulling to get like actual, data from, so we can lay out a solution. So I do that and try to find spots, but it was definitely a doozy. The CEM, I think, was good, but it was also tough because I had to go pretty far away from where I was to take it. So much so that like the night before the exam, I ended up staying in a hotel to sleep because it was like almost 2 hours away. It was in Long Island, and Long Island, I'm like, why don't they just become another state as far away as they are? And it's crazy. So I went out and I took it over there, and it was crazy. That night, actually, I didn't get any sleep because the fire alarm went off in my room, and it was just
Oh,
this
just what you
thing.
don't need before a big
Yeah,
exam.
yeah, but I was confident, in the test, the approach, and what I was gonna run into, and that really helped me a lot. So yeah, it was definitely a doozy. I definitely felt it.
So coming full circle back to what you're working on now, what are some of your biggest challenges in your day to day? Are you managing a team now? Are you like, what's kind of changed in your,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
what's that been like as a transition? Because you've been part of a couple different organizations and you've learned a lot. And so first you went really deep on the control stuff and you got some certifications, and then you broadened out. And when you talked about some of the coordination work that you were doing, you're finding out a lot about adjacent trades and like leaning pretty heavily into their world. So you're clear on those interfaces. So going through that process probably was a big part in preparing you to branch out and be able to, just kind of put your arms around a bigger problem, a whole project in some senses. So, and now that comes with having a team and managing others and motivating people day to day and just running a business. So what's some of that been like for you? Maybe what's been the hardest part of that?
Yeah, in general, it's been it can be challenging sometimes. I would say for sure that design piece, the coordination piece, as a design engineer, you can tell when somebody's done it when you review a set of drawings. You can tell when somebody hasn't done it, right? You can tell when walls exist in areas that don't show up on the mechanical set, or pipes are in a room and no was shown when shown anywhere.
Mm,
I think one of the best parts about it, though, in general, is I love coordination because I think you get a chance to kind of get into the mind, if you take it for what it is, right, into the mind of the people. Where are they going? What are the knowledge gaps that make them see just their portion of the problem and not the broader picture? And how can we
mm,
work together to kind of paint it together? And so, having been on the contractor side, going into the controls, going into some turnkey work, then doing design work, and I think because I met each of these different and you can it's hard. I guess some sense you could call them a stakeholder, right? Because they're the people building, and then all the way back to the people designing. But having met each of these people, I've gotten in between contractors and solved disputes. You get in between engineers and solving disputes, and you have to be able to change your tone a little bit depending on who you speak with. And so that could be that. I think, what's funny, I don't think the technical parts are really difficult at all. I think you get to a point when you learn how to manage the client is when I think you've really gotten sharp at understanding how to really do something, right? And I think being effective at painting a picture for the client on the full process and the impacts of taking certain approaches and not taking certain approaches
mm.
is in itself, I think, challenging. And I've done a lot of owners rep work, and you're kind of now sitting next to the client and you're helping them figure decisions out on what consultants to use, or what approaches, what should we include in the scope of work. And I think being able to be effective at painting a picture as to the 5 Ws: who, what, where, when, why, and do that. Because as engineers, some people can hear the word no and pick up their ball and go home, things of that nature. But I think sometimes no is because, no, I don't get it. or no, you could walk me through this a little bit better. So we got a small
Right.
team. There's about like 6 of us. So we're here. And in terms of when it comes to some of the projects, like on an actual job itself, whether we're commissioning and being brought in like super late, and it's like be awesome if we jumped in during the design process, but that's okay. Um, or if we're doing a turnkey project, and like the church was a turnkey project, and the way you approach jobs depending on the areas you're in is always going to be a little bit different, especially more urban settings, type of contractors you have to pick from, the budgets that are available to you. So you have to be able to think in the same vein as some of the different people you're going to encounter there. And in
Hmm.
volunteering solutions that are well thought out, again, that's where the research comes in, and it just turns into a project in itself, right? In terms of procuring the right people that aren't going to come on the job, do what they want to do and kind of not be part of the coordination process.
Right.
Even from a design standpoint, there's some areas that you may need to push out just because there's not enough funding to get the job done on that side of it. So it could have its challenges. I think in any area, and I'm maybe a little weird like this, but when I work, at least in the tri-state area, I like taking the bus to the sites that I go to, the bus or the
Hmm.
train, because I think the design process doesn't start when you start Revit or you open up, code, whatever. I think it's like when you see the people going in and out of a building or in an area,
Mm.
it just changes things. I don't know. Like I'm that type that I kind of have to be a part of it. Like when we do hospital work or healthcare work, I love catching the buses there, seeing the nurses or the doctors or people walking in, and even trying to start a conversation, and understanding that, because these are people you're designing for, right? When you think about a CAT scan, in there, it's one thing to look at it as a room that says CT on it. It's another thing when you either been a patient before or you've met a patient that's went there, right? And I think that's the line hard approach, is that the design process starts way before we touch physical things. It's the people that we think about that are part of it.
Yeah, those are your occupants, the people that are actually in that space.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I really get a feel for how adaptable you are and you have to be to work on such different types of projects at different scales, different types of clients. I really get a sense of what it's like to kind of sit elbow to elbow with the client and guiding them through decisions where they're nervous because every decision that they make carries an implication in terms of cost, schedule, complexity. And
Mhm.
then at the end of the day, this thing's going to be delivered and they're going to be left with a product that, they're desperately hoping that they like, but it also feels like it's happening very fast. And it's not like they can just hit pause and say, we need 6 months to think all this over, because time is money. So they got to get going. And they know
Yeah.
that, but it's just a difficult situation. So to be able to have the sensitivity and listening to work with clients that are in that situation, it must go such a long way. And just building trust so that down the line, when there are issues, whether it's on the budget or the schedule or quality or something else, they know that they can trust you to work through it and come up with good solutions with them. So
Mhm.
that's such a big value to be able to add. I'm again wildly impressed by what you're doing. So yeah, really cool to hear
Appreciate that.
and how you just come at it from the bottom up. It's really wonderful. So those are all the main questions I had. I guess if there's anything else you wanted to share, and I kind of have one question in closing. I usually ask candidates that have come through my program if they have any advice for the PE process, but I think for you, I'll widen the question even beyond that and saying, what advice would you give someone that's maybe 5 to 10 years into their career that's thinking about making a change, or taking a leap or doing something that maybe they've wanted to do and they're not sure if they can find the courage? How should they think about that? And what would you share with them?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but it's a legitimate question, right? A lot of people, I think, are like, even nowadays, right? When you see software and being so integrated into what we do, some people are feeling like they might get phased out, right? And like, I gotta, evolve or perish. I don't want to be left behind.
Yeah, the
Or
AI revolution is scary.
it's scary, but people just tack it on to anything now, and it's being sold as a product, which doesn't make sense. But it is something, to be fair, right? Like if you ever look at any shop, right, when you went grocery shopping, there used to be 50 people at the cash register, and then now there's maybe a couple, right? And everything comes with that, right? What is these revolutions? I would say the intimidation, will a lot of the battle is going to be fought in the mind. I think that's where the battlefield will start in terms of why not. Again, I'm always going to stick to purpose. Like, what is your why? What is it that would make this license, let's say, for example, relevant for you in your day to day, if that's where you choose to go. If you're looking to become a professional engineer, like read the ethics piece, read the portions of it of your responsibility to the public. And does that even mean anything to you? Right? Like, do you engineer with purpose? Do you do your day-to-day job with purpose? Right? I mean, I've met you, and I'm sure you have too. PEs that know a lot, and PEs that know a lot have no soul to the work. And then there's some PEs that don't know much, but they're trying their best. I would say, fighting any desire for getting it or picking up licensure for just the sake of doing it is something that I would advise, not against per se, but I would say that is more of a trigger point to look for more. Why? What
Yeah,
else?
dig a little deeper.
Dig a little deeper, because sometimes it's not all shallow. Sometimes, yeah, it is. You've seen a lot of people around you that have it, and they probably got a raise. That's possible too. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't help in that, but I think if you chase money, it's always going to lead to emptiness. Because you get the whole world, lose your soul, and I just don't think it's worth doing that for the hours and the time it takes. I think if you're passionate about engineering as a whole and you respect the craft, like, this is a great profession, and I think there's a respect that should come up alongside of it. Those are the type of things that you want to sense and see if that's even within you, in there. And if that's the case and you're concerned about taking that risk, but you see the respect, you see of not the title, but of what it means to be this type of engineer, I think that's a good sign to say, hey, maybe I can go for this. Maybe I'm afraid. Yeah, I don't think courage is moving with the absence of fear. It's moving on in spite of it, right? And there's a boldness, I think, that you can go for. And at the end of the day, failure, you'll never know until you try, right? And I think that that's something that should always be held on to. So hopefully that helps other people who are interested in this. And I don't know if your question also was for in general, for like an engineer in general, or was it just for the PE?
Well, really for someone just thinking about their career, because one of the things I'm most impressed by is just the leap, the courage to take the leap. And I love the way you did it too. You maintain the relationships that you had with your previous employer to the point where they were one of your first clients once you got started. And that kind of helped you on your way. And boy, what a source of reassurance that must be to who you are as a person, that you'd be able to maintain those relationships and continue on. I'm sure there's an impact to when somebody valuable moves on, and you were able to work through that. So I just think that's so impressive. And yeah, any guidance that you have to share for people as they're going through their career as to how to do that?
Yeah, I think you have to. I always kind of manage myself almost like a business before I even started one. So and really, when I went to consulting, that was crystallized when I talked to the supervisor, and he said, "You have internal clients just as much as you have external clients." And when he said that, I was like, "Man, I never even thought of it like that." And he's like, "Yes, because you think about the diversity of the team, they don't have to come to you and say, 'Hey, can you take a look at this?' They can go to anybody else." And so I think you have to acknowledge that and realize, like, your current employer, your current boss, the people you have, regardless if you're particularly enamored by the work you're doing, you have to have a certain respect for them and what they're doing, and don't take it for granted. So I think what the saying is, I've heard, bloom where you're planted. And, it's hard to find contentment sometimes when you're in a role maybe you're just not as excited for in general. But bloom where you're planted in terms of showing up on time, doing those things. And then wherever those buds come, whether it's being on time, being reliable, that next step, if you take a leap, your tool bag may not be full with the sharpest, calculations, things of that nature, but you will have a steady go-to bag of moves that that you can still do because you did it when you're in a scenario that was more you're comfortable with. So I would always encourage an engineer in any phase, if they're trying to make a big leap, really consider those things. I wouldn't say, like, if you're kind of essentially the person nobody really wants to work with anymore, and and it's because of an attitude and things of that nature. Sometimes you might have some more character things to work on, and I think character should always precede gifting beforehand. That should be first, and then you can run into the other things. Again, people may disagree with me. I'm just saying the ones that I've seen take risks, and maybe they fell. Or I've taken risks and I fell before, but I think the ability to get back up a lot of it is where that character is building. And so there's some suffering that people got to go through when it comes to that. And people don't like that word, but that's where you get hardened and you learn how to endure. And I think endurance is a necessary component to be an engineer in any industry. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I couldn't have said it better myself. It makes me think about, working for different bosses, and sometimes there being some friction or some moments that, you wish were different, and, you don't get to choose. But I think what's always kind of put my mind back in the right place in those situations is reminding myself how much responsibility that person has and how much responsibility I have, which is comparatively less. So what they're dealing with, the stress level, what they have to deliver, the pressure that they receive from their senior managers and on upward, just respecting that for what it is. And if things didn't go perfectly with me, that's only a small part of what they have to deal with in their day to day. And that has kind of helped me orient myself and kind of just be respectful. And I also really like what you said about just doing the little things. That I'm going to remember that saying, because I've never heard that one before. That's a good one. You bloom where you're planted. And if you do that, then things will work out down the line.
Yeah, you got to. And again, it's very easy to take for granted. Everybody's getting paid a salary, right? And so that's why like people look on TV and, superstar, somebody is depressed, and they're like, well, what are they depressed about? They're rich, and all that. And yeah, be that as it may, if that was the cure though, then they probably wouldn't be feeling what they feel. But people have legitimate problems outside of the work they do. And so like, I like what you're saying in terms of being compassionate and respecting the fact that it's not easy to lead a department. It's not easy to lead a team. It's not even easy to just lead a project at the engineering level, level 1, 2, whatever the numbers are, how the firms that you may work for lay it all out. It's not easy. And it's going to take challenges to kind of help you learn how to do that. Dealing with a difficult boss today is what prepped me, and I've had some crazy stories, and we don't have time to get into them. I've had some crazy stories, but dealing with them helped me when I had to deal with a difficult client later. And I think if I had shied away from those situations and left as soon as I saw the first hint of trouble, I think I would have missed out on a really big blessing on learning how to, be strengthened in the endurance. So, yeah.
Well, Christian, you've shared a lot of wisdom today, and your story is super inspiring. So thank you for coming on, and wish you the best luck in what you're working on. I hope we do this again in 3 to 5 years, and I'd love to hear some more updates and everything as you progress.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I'll give a plug, the Mechanical PE Exam Prep, best prep program out in the industry right now. So I will say that. I'll post on my LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever. I will stand by that. You have literally, in my opinion, one of the best programs. And I thank you for what you're doing for the community and for our profession in general. So thank you for your help.
Thanks for listening to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review to help other engineers find the podcast. And if you're looking for a program that will help you pass the PE exam, check out the full access bundle available at mechanicalpeexamprep.com, and feel free to reach out with any questions. I would be honored to be your guide on the journey to becoming a professional engineer.